Yes. Hi. Yeah. I'm back. Hi. Yeah. Everyone. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm here. Okay. Yeah. Hi. Yes, I know it's been quite some time, hasn't it? I'm not gonna bore you with anything like substantial, but now that I'm basically back and I'm back on the content grind, what better way to kind of start this year with today's topic, video games. Because that topic has been fucking done to death already. This was something that came to mind, and I decided that this would be one of the best opening videos to kind of start with, especially on this very family and friendly platform which is YouTube right here.
Hello, pleasure to be meeting again. Quite a pleasure. Fucking video games, am I right?
I mean, this is considered family friendly in this generation, am I right?
Video games are interesting. Not sure how to transition off of that. What I mean is that most of the creative aspects and ideas that go into certain things like video games, they're just straight up astounding. Like back in the simpler days, how do we go from this to something like this? My God, the action, the world, the visuals. I must gamble. While gaming slowly started to get more and more complex, so did the ideal design and the amount of background info that goes into creating it. The most interesting one of all, the game's lore. You know, stuff like Easter eggs, references, world building that builds off a connected narrative all give way to having the average person invest in this chaotic hot pot of depression and crack that comes with it. Maybe make a misunderstood character very strong and explain why. Might even make a career off of power scaling. Hopefully you won't get cancelled. For example, Kratos, the ghost of Sparta. While prophesied to be the individual to eventually bring down the Greek pantheon, you might ask, why didn't the gods of Olympus do something about it? Well, if you play this game, part of which is revealed that he had a brother that the original god of war mistook as the fabled Mark I, the one that was prophesied. Nice going, Ares. I'm sure that won't bite you in the ass later. Well, I guess technically it was a stab in the chest. Why does the Doom guy hate the demons so much? Because they killed his rabbit. Yep. That certainly explains why he started as a former soldier to becoming part god, killing God and Satan God who is also himself, apparently. In other words, that's right. When it comes to video game knowledge, is power. So Oregon use hips. But the stories that perpetuate our virtual entertainment can also be the driving force that keeps us interested in almost any given franchise, which keeps us wanting more. However, not all games have amazing stories, and I'm not saying that every game's lore needs to be Oscar winning with literally no flaws or problems whatsoever, but at the same time, I'm not in the mood to get slapped with complicated bullshit to understand one story. And trust me, a lot of game franchises have these issues for trying seamlessly to make a connection to each game, and then it becomes this hodgepodge of confusing canon. It just makes no goddamn sense. So I want to take this time by giving you a rundown of some of my favorite complicated lore in games, going from weird to just completely batshit insane to understand. Not in order. Okay, maybe in order. There is something I can easily describe regarding the Dark Souls series. I mean, besides being the Cuphead of action adventure, but really, it would be breathtaking. Whether it be regarding the first trilogy, Bloodborne, or Mr. Game of the Year here, you can say this about any of the games really, but there's something spectacular about these games and the shit that goes into it. Only from FromSoft, where sleep is optional. Now, funny enough, Dark Souls' story and canon are relatively tame in the grand scheme of things. However, the main thing that was on my mind when it comes to Dark Souls is how in the gaggle fuck does anyone understand the story? It's funny because compared to other games that I'll mention later, Dark Souls story isn't even relatively that confusing, but it just takes time to understand, which sure makes sense in almost any game that exists. With a game created by FromSoft and that, man, you obviously wouldn't really understand the story during the first couple playthroughs in. I mean, sure, I know for certain when I first encountered Melania, she certainly was the Blade of Nicola. Now again, regardless, with most games, playing it through a couple times to understand what's truly going on, like that's usually a given, sure. But here's a question. How do some people understand this in a matter of days? Elden Ring's a good example, since most I feel don't really understand the whole story the first couple of times playing it through, as most games be like. Still, somehow when the game just recently came out, for a huge spectacular spectacle as this game is, people somehow already figured everything, like almost this whole shit out. Like that's just insane. Like I remember barely a weekend or so, wikis were filled, YouTube videos were uploaded, and whole ass channels were made regarding a lot of the small details. Everything about the story and the lore, guides and builds are already created. And in short, it makes me both impressed and terrified at the same time, actually. Like for newcomers, sure, why spend your time understanding a game that would take 50 plus hours on average when you can understand everything about it with a simple Google search. So for as straightforward as the Super Mario franchise is, you normally wouldn't really think much about it having a well thought out story. Like seriously, you can easily summarize the Super Mario series in a single sentence in Notepad to Jumpman saves Blondie from Turtle. But funny enough, this franchise actually has more in-depth lore to its story, with other games like the Paper Mario series, which sets the idea of different styles for the franchise. Super Mario RPG setting a precedent for long convoluted storytelling in the series. Continuing that basis with the Mario & Luigi series, Yoshi's Island establishing official origins of the main characters. Like shit, even the first original Super Mario Bros. Also had more depth to its stories, where apparently it says that Bowser kidnaps Princess Peach, Princess Toadstool, right after he turned all the mushroom people into stone bricks and plants, and she is the only one with the ability to reverse that. Maybe someone probably should have told Mario about that. Well, games like the original Mario, sure, many games were like that back in the early 80s, when most of the stories played out were usually simple and easy to understand, and the only way to get a general gist of what was going on entirely was by reading the in-depth plot via the manuals the games came with. And besides, most were just simple, fast-paced, short and sweet style games made within arcades. I'm sure the transition of story setting between the original Donkey Kong until the release of Super Mario Bros., Miyamoto's concern with the story hardly mattered at the time. Like for example, during the early days of video game, did you really want to understand why a yellow cheese slice was getting chased by ghosts? Well, you know I did. But yeah, even back in the day, there was some thought to Bowser's motives before he just wanted them peaches. Now, that is where things could have ended. The Nintendo decided to do what is equivalent to giving their firstborn child a gun, close the door while saying, "Have fun," until it proceeds to shoot itself in the head until they came back all surprised Pikachu face, seeing all the damaged canon and lore splattered on the walls. No matter how you slice it, the Mario canon just really makes no sense in the grand scheme of things. We have several series in the franchise that perpetuates different rules and stories, with people online still trying to figure things out. Like you can already establish an origin to Mario through Yoshi's Island here, with a smooth transition from the original Donkey Kong to Mario Brothers and Super Mario Brothers. Fast forward to the rest of the mainline series of games until now, and you got yourself a pretty standard sense of continuity. But holy hell did that shit get tossed out the window, because we have other side games, spin-offs, and other games which ended up establishing certain problems and retcons. Like, you know, there's an issue that when they made a new Super Mario Brothers 6 years later, they came out with 3 more. Okay, now I know it sounds stupid, right? But if there's any chance that new Super Luigi U is considered canon, I am all for it. This series is over like 40 years old, literally 4 decades, but it feels weird how many of these games are never directly stated in canon that all these other events happen. Anytime they do, they're mostly shoehorned in as like a quick reference or a small Easter egg, just as a way for Nintendo to remind you that these games even exist. That doesn't even begin to touch upon the turn-based RPG series of games, where aside from Paper Mario, where it's pretty much its own separate continuity, anything related to games like The Legend of the 7 Stars is never mentioned, or even shit relating to the events in the Mario Luigi series of games. Like, where the fuck does Bean Kingdom fit into this? But then again, it makes me kind of glad those games are not officially said they're canon, because one of them had to do with fucking time travel, and that is just a 10-pound nope in a 5-pound bag. In other words, trying to understand Mario canon is just nonsensical the more you try and dig into the cracks. Hell, people are still trying to argue and convince themselves if the Mario movie is canon or not. And sure, while this entire thing is completely maddening from a purely narrative perspective, in reality, that's kind of how Nintendo officially wants to portray Mario, as retarded as that is. But thanks to Nintendo refusing to mention any form of details or connections to previous games and events directly, it makes the Mario franchise, as I would say, satisfyingly resistant to modern conceits of continuity. Damn, those are some big words right there. Surface level wise, sure, it sounds stupid, but instead of specific archetypes, Mario is considered more of a trope of actors, a jack of all trades, both in terms of character and story. Funny enough, kind of makes sense how he can go from being a carpenter to working in construction to being a plumber, then to somehow having a PhD in pharmaceuticals. I mean, even during the early conceptions of Mario's creation, Miyamoto always had that general idea where he wanted to see Mario. In reality, that is just how Nintendo tends to prioritize some of the games nowadays, like Mario and the other works in that vein, by having a narrative cohesion throughout a series slowly becoming less valuable than themes expressed through gameplay mechanics. And you know what? Sometimes that's a perfectly acceptable and undervalued form of storytelling. That still doesn't make the series any less frustrating than it already is, though. While Nintendo basically took the Mario canon, shoved their thumbs up the lore's ass, spun it around 360 degrees around like a basketball before taking it and slam dunking into a wood chipper of constant inconsistencies and retcons, and took what remained and used it for illumination to make a movie out of, in comparison, Sonic's story and lore are relatively consistent. for the most part. One of the best things about Sonic that stood the test of time is the amazing genius of his aesthetic and how malleable his character design is. Really enough, Mario kind of also shares some aspect of this as well, but that's what's great about Sonic is how he can fit in almost any kind of tone and style to where as long as the continuity of the franchise remains relatively the same, he can be put in almost anywhere and it works. We even have some of the best examples. Archie's Sonic, Sonic the Comics, multitudes of animations and cartoons. Hell, it even works in live action. Oh, not that one. That one was fan-made. I can go on and on, but I could definitely save that for another time. But right now, we are mostly talking about the canon and lore for the gaming side of things. And sure, it has some issues, but the best that can sum up the Sonic series is simple but complicated. Simple meaning that if you just look at the general mainline titles, and when I mean mainline, I mean the bigger budgeted games that came out on console, starting from the first game in 1991 to the most recent one being Sonic Frontiers in 2022, then there you go. You have the most simple, consistent like narrative for the story. Until you look into things further, which turns the series into a simple 100-meter dash faster than the speeds of Usain Bolt to a mere theoretical chiropractic level of what the fuckery. Okay, I know I'm just exaggerating here, but that's the general way most people may see the story of Sonic surface level wise. I could go on about some examples like how some of the Sonic titles will be released on multiple platforms and one of them will happen to be heavily different narrative wise, but still considered canon all the way, and all that really does is make understanding the connected narrative more headache inducing than it already is. And that doesn't even begin to touch upon the games and other release changes Sonic team decided to make to complicate things even further. Mostly notable things like and also. As much as how confusing the Sonic lore can be, at least I can safely say, at least it's not like Mario. Make of that what you will. So you can either take the blue pill and live in pure ignorance of just seeing only the mainline games as the current amount of information you need to the game's canon, or the red pill and dive into the rabbit hole trying to piece together everything. As you can see, Sega took the red pill given the fact they're apparently hiring a Sonic lore manager. So I don't know, pick your poison I guess. As for me, as a dedicated Sonic fan, I'm gonna go ahead and take the black pill right here and basically just create my own headcanon timeline. So I'm not all that expertly versed in the Final Fantasy series. I will just be honest right there. I'm mostly more familiar with Final Fantasy VII, given the fact that it is the most well-known game in the series in its entirety. Plus, I remember my dad used to have like all 3 of the discs back in the day. By the way, remember that time when games of this caliber required to have multiple discs for one game? In that case, would Final Fantasy VII be one of the first couple games with some form of DLC expansion? Well, I guess technically that would go to Sega with their lock-on tech for Sonic and Knuckles if you really think about it. Regardless of what it seems, Final Fantasy as a whole has a lot of impact within the RP genre of games. A lot of the influence that goes under the radar, whether that be from certain game mechanics or visual representation, but one of the biggest standards it has set was the storytelling, where even from the first ever game in the series, the characters, villains, concepts, and lore just filled to the brim with details that it's no wonder this became a well-loved franchise for over 3 decades. And speaking of its lore, none of it matters. Okay, I'm not saying that the stories don't literally matter, but one of the things that I found is after looking at the recent remake of Final Fantasy VII, I initially thought, wow, I wonder what other games fit in the timeline order. That's obviously something a normal person would think. And that's when I found out that Final Fantasy is what I would say is a very unique, and in some cases it is entirely a very malleable series. Through in this case, the canon and story for each game don't fucking matter. Like really, you can play any Final Fantasy game in the series and in the grand scheme of things, none of them are connected whatsoever. While all the Final Fantasy games take place in similar universes due to their shared common themes and motifs within their worlds, plots, and mechanics, none of them are related whatsoever, despite websites like IGN over here giving a list of games you should play in order. And I'm sure there are a lot of games like this that exist, but Final Fantasy is the best example where you can play any game and those stories and canon are completely standalone titles, even with some of them even spawning sequels. In other words, it is primarily a good example of an anthology series, to put it simply. Alright, okay, what's next on the list of games? Surely this next franchise would be easier to understand. Shit. All right, again, I'm just gonna go ahead and quickly say this. I have yet to play any of the Kingdom Hearts games myself. But wait, if you haven't played the games yet, how can you even give your subjective take on the franchise's story like this? Is what you're probably thinking. And look, I get it, but just let me cook real quick. Now, I already had a general gist about the series in itself, and I, for one, have always been pretty interested in playing this franchise. It was mostly the gameplay that interests me, and I'm usually pretty stingy when it comes to gameplay anytime I hear RPG. Looking at you, Pokemon. But especially, it is mostly due to how much this game is usually held in like high regard, and like usually stuff like the soundtrack or the fact that many crossovers exist. Like for some reason, the entirety of the Disney franchise is somehow in the story. Is that fucking Cloud Strife? Sephiroth! One of the biggest issues I always hear when it comes to Kingdom Hearts is usually like how it's a lot more harder to try and understand everything, and that's mostly in regards to just playing the games itself. But I would say it's mostly because so far this is probably like one of the best times of anything to be able to play most of the existing installments in the franchise. It has never been easier thanks to the release of some of the remastered bundles I can easily get on current hardware. And I believe from the time of me saying this, I was told by someone that you can just easily get one bundle just to play almost all the games, and you can just immediately move to Kingdom Hearts 3 straight afterwards. However, despite that, it does beg the question, how the fuck did we get here?
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
Now, funny enough, Kingdom Hearts is not the first nor the only game to have like convoluted chronological timelines like this. Like a lot of franchises will share this weird pattern of releasing a future installment with the surface idea of thinking if it's like some sort of continuation, but only to take place way beforehand or do like a complete 180 screwing with the canon. Games like Devil May Cry, the Nier series, Resident Evil, Metal Gear, Dragon Quest, Castlevania, God of War, Doom, Mega Man, GTA, and the list can go on. But many of these games are pretty much guilty of this. It just so happens that Kingdom Hearts is kind of considered the poster boy of this shit. And I mean, like, come on, like, I don't even have a clue. How can you look at this selection of games and go, I get it. I swear, you couldn't even explain this shit to your therapist without this motherfucker thinking you needed to resume your medication, my guy. Me when I got the Kingdom Hearts autism instead of the being good at math or science autism. Now look, I know it seems like I'm already giving this game shit already, but on the bright side, majority of all the games are relatively all connected. And putting them and figuring it out on a timeline, it does seem pretty much seamless. The only problem is at the time, majority of these games kind of came out like years apart while also on different platforms, with each game still apparently connecting and contributing to the overall story. Games that are all simple stories building off each other, then like 5 years down the line it just hit you with a prequel sequel. It's like trying to put a puzzle together, but to get the rest of the pieces you have to pay to get them, and they all come from different store locations, all released at different times. I'll be honest, I don't even know how some of you longtime fans were even able to deal with this. You had a couple on PlayStation, some on the Game Boy, one on the mobile phone, okay, one on the DS, 3DS, PSP, fucking internet. And yes, all of these games are canon. Nigga, what? Yeah, this franchise went through so many messy and crazy hoops of remakes and remasters. In some cases, it just feels like it's just beyond comprehension. Like, where do you think the meme like came from when it comes to this franchise? Especially given the fact that many of the other games all came out on separate handhelds and other devices, while most of the main games with regular numerals in the title all came out on console. Like, could you even imagine going through your entire life only playing Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, then finally waiting till number 3 to come out, only to realize it's the 12th installment? Don't even get me started on the weird naming schemes of some of these games, which are like a plague to almost every long-running franchise. Like, my dumbass really thought Dream Drop Distance was supposedly Kingdom Hearts 3 because, you know, it was on the 3DS, which had a 3 on it, and yes, I was retarded enough to think Square Enix was that clever. Like, I dare you to look me directly in the eyes and explain to me what the numerals doing. Kingdom Hearts is definitely infamous for its torturous storytelling, and while easy to understand now, it was basically 2 decades in the making. In other words, understanding the Kingdom Hearts lore, I would say, is a lot like the lines at Disneyland in regards to like how long and winded the lines are. Just experience not just the rides, the attractions, pretty much everything. Unless you get that fast pass. I'm probably going to say something that is going to be deemed controversial, but I think the stories and a lot in most fighting game franchises are just not that important. You are free to shoot me if you disagree with that take. I don't know if it's just like my monkey brain or I'm just desensitized from the competitive side of things, but no one really talks about the story and lore that much in regards to most fighting games. Street Fighter, Killer Instinct, Dead or Alive, Tekken, and Guilty Gear, they all mostly just seem and play like your run-of-the-mill arcade-style button masher you and your buds boot up to settle your differences. Last time I checked, the story of these games was the least of your concerns. I bet majority of the people I know don't even know jack shit about some of these games' stories. Most are probably gonna know more about the ins and outs of Smash Brothers than anything. You better not say nothing to me, boy. You know I'm right. Now, I wasn't initially planning on adding this section until it was brought to my attention, but when it comes to confusing game canon, this game in particular needs to be discussed. Yeah, no introduction is needed with this game. Most memorable opening theme, Explicit Fatalities, and was partially responsible for the ESRB rating alongside other games like Night Trap, Doom, and Lethal Enforcers. You're welcome, society. While Mortal Kombat is influential in its own right, even its own stories and lore became pretty convoluted. And sure, this series has been running for over 3 decades now, so you're bound to hit some weird, confusing roadblocks. However, it didn't start that way. For starters, for those who don't know the actual story of Mortal Kombat, it was relatively simple, as you can see a more detailed explanation from Wikipedia here based on the 2-page comic book that was tied into the manual of the game. The game takes place in Earthrealm, where a tournament is being held on Shang Tsung's island, on which 7 of his locations serves as stages in the game. For 500 years straight, Goro has been undefeated in the tournament and won 9 consecutive tournaments. If Goro wins again, Shao Kahn, Emperor of Outworld, will be allowed to take Earthrealm. In order to prevent this, a new generation of warriors must challenge Goro. By 90s standards, pretty simple, right? Now, how does that story span for the rest of this 30-year-old franchise?
I am so sorry.
Jesus, all this time when most people say Kingdom Hearts was hard to understand, when the actual answer was Mortal fucking Kombat. Now, I know I said that most fighting game stories are not really that important. I'm glad this kind of furthers my point, but just why? Now, when I was looking shit up, I really didn't expect this. I was already generally familiar with the series already. Like, I already knew my Shao Kahn, the main antagonist, Johnny Cage, fan favorites like Scorpion and Sub-Zero, Raiden, and also Liu Kang. But seeing the number of games in the franchise, like, give me a break. Even when I was looking and I found this Reddit post someone made for more details in the chronology, not only did I realize that the side titles and spin-offs are pretty much canon, but there are also 2 continuities, possibly 3. Guess which one that is. Like, come on, you really couldn't call the reboot games like something different? The hell is with these Xbox ass titles? And that doesn't even begin to touch upon the fact that I recently discovered during editing that there are apparently multiple incarnations of both Sub-Zero and Scorpion that I will not further discuss any more than that. You will not make me. Do you want me to spike your Kool-Aid with fentanyl? The naming schemes for these games don't even make it any easier, when by the time they got to Mortal Kombat 4, they just fucking gave up the number titles until bringing it back with Mortal Kombat 10. But then they started using Roman numerals for some— oh, for fuck's sake! Also, I find it weird how the first reboot is considered to everyone that Mortal Kombat, the one released in 2011, is confirmed to be Mortal Kombat 9, but if you look at the mainline title releases, like continuity-wise, before the next reboot in 2023, there are technically 7 games in total. In other words, they fucking skipped 8. What the fuck happened to number 8? And I swear, before any of you in the comments begin to type a stupid numbers joke like 7, 8, 9, you deserve the electric chair. Like, we already discussed about the whole naming issue and how many franchises do this, sure, but it definitely reaches its peak here. And before any of you speak about Mortal Kombat versus DC, no, we are not touching that. I will proceed to shit yourself if we open this can of worms that are these kinds of crossovers. But Mortal Kombat versus DC is considered canon to the Injustice continuity. Okay. And I also wrote the Bible. I'm sure if you look deep into this series, you could probably make sense of everything, but to me, this franchise's timeline is already a huge mess. I am not going to be discussing it any further. I think you already get the general idea here. I, however, will link that Reddit post I found somewhere, because this person explained this whole thing way better than I could, because to someone like me, it just felt like the creators and publishers of the franchise just do fucking coin tosses to see where they should take the game's story. The Legend of Zelda. Sorry, I kind of had to do that. Possibly one of my all-time favorite franchises, easily top 10-ish. This franchise, when you look at it, has a lot of similarities to other games mentioned, but when it comes to the rest of its story, Zelda's just weird. Like, don't get me wrong, the Legend of Zelda franchise, I would say, has immaculate storytelling and lore, but connecting storylines wasn't exactly its primary thing. A lot of the games from its first inception didn't really do connected stories, but only like small snippets of direct continuations from each new entry. From the original Zelda to Zelda 2, A Link to the Past to Link's Awakening, Ocarina of Time to Majora's Mask, and Wind Waker to Phantom Hourglass, you get the picture. That's something I've noticed. I've noticed that always seems to be like the general pattern they did, where many of their games seem like their own thing, their own standalone stories. which in some way they brought back with the newer entries. In other words, it seemed like the franchise kind of played into another form of an anthology series, and in a lot of ways played into that notion heavily. Like shit, it's even in the title of the fucking franchise, where the narrative is played off as stories passed down, little folk tales, a legend if you will. Although the main important characters all having similar names, they all appear to be different than each other, which later confirms that they're all similar incarnations of each other. As time goes on, each new entry adds more to the story with more details and in-depth lore to add, with Ocarina of Time being the main catalyst for those wanting to understand the chronology of the franchise. And thanks to Nintendo not really giving direct confirmation of where each of these games take place, it adds to the subtle narrative of it all, and for many reasons why the game series is just so beloved, and it all just ties down into the mystery of it all. Until Skyward Sword. Okay, to be fair, the idea of a timeline of the Zelda continuity was always a thing mentioned low-key by the publishers, thanks to Ocarina of Time here, but it wasn't until Skyward Sword that Nintendo basically made it official, and sure, it makes sense. Skyward Sword added so many details that gave it the impression it was the start of everything in the timeline, including the origins of the Master Sword and how the idea of continuous incarnations of the same character came into play. However, when the official timeline from the Hyrule Historia first came out in 2011, with Skyward Sword being the 15th installment added, but since then we had 4 more mainline games released, so how does that timeline hold up?
説明できます。
Now, this isn't horrible, but I remember no doubt that there has been a lot of controversy even before updating it with new entries since Skyward Sword, but man, where do we begin? And it's very obvious it's mostly because of this. Ocarina of Time still plays a big catalyst in the method of how Nintendo wanted them to take the timeline, and it was already going to bring in problems. Even though it's a very beloved game, and rightfully so, that game still has a lot to do with fucking time travel, and it wouldn't be the last. But even the fandom, there was already talk about the idea of being split timelines, especially given slight changes in the story, like what happened with Wind Waker. But that was before, and currently most people pretty much collectively agree with how the so-called child and adult timeline goes and about things in the chronology. Then they see this and they're like,
and like that, you've lost me.
This third timeline that Nintendo did was basically the main thing that I remember most people from hell and back were shitting on this given what-if idea of this so-called Fallen timeline. Especially due to the Fallen timeline being the most changed timeline, with the 2 additions down the line being A Link Between Worlds and Triforce Heroes. And then there's Breath of the Wild. This game is still being discussed on where it fits timeline wise, even despite the fact Nintendo established that Breath of the Wild takes place at the farthest point of the timeline, but not a timeline, but for all of them. Yeah. Most people are already having a hard time accepting this anyway, especially thanks to the game itself even mentioning situations that happen in other games in separate timelines, while also having a mixture of every race in the franchise, which really shouldn't be possible, since even just having one of them means the other one can't exist yet. And don't even get me started about the shit I hear surrounding Tears of the Kingdom. Now, I can't solely blame Nintendo that much, but Nintendo and the people who worked on Zelda were just given a weird hand when dealing with this franchise, with the given idea initially that most of them feel like they aren't necessarily connected anyway. Even so, it started off simple, where each game was building off each other, just adding more to the lore. Like Ocarina of Time was initially built off of A Link to the Past, adding context to certain things mentioned, like the Imprisoning War, but the more and more games came out, it started adding more issues and questions yet to be answered, with many continuity errors and retcons, and yeah, you know what, on second thought, they should have just kept the mystery and left it to the viewers' imagination. In other words, in comparison to Mario, this here is a prime example of what happens when Nintendo tries to do canon. Alright, let's talk about FNAF. Five Nights at Freddy's. Like what is there to really say about this franchise that hasn't been said already, besides the fact that by far it is the most completely batshit nonsensical story of all time, and was pretty much the primary reason for this video concept, besides Kingdom Hearts. While many moons of Franklin's game has existed since 2014 as this man's last-ditch effort to create a successful game, and wouldn't you know it, he did it. He got all the recognition from the internet to content creators playing it, also got the attention of MatPat as a game theory suggestion before Stockholm Children took a whole of... Wait a second. It was you!
I'll kill him! I'll kill him! I swear to God, I'll kill him! This is all his fault! This is all his fault!
It's okay. Hey,
It Due to this success, Scott Kaufman went straight for making sequel after sequel after sequel after sequel. And I gotta say, this man was able to create and release 4 total games all within 10 months. God damn, all under a year. Call of Duty's got nothing on this. Thanks to the franchise's popularity throughout the years, Scott managed a small amount of titles within this small mainline series of games. All in all, people pretty much loved this series to the point where even a movie finally got published. Sure, it was a bit late, but still. Long story short, FNAF kind of brought in a precedent to both horror and indie games in some way. Excuse me. And part of that all hinges on the story and lore of this franchise. Oh god, the lore. It was already mentioned before, but FNAF is pretty famous, or I guess you could say more infamous, for its interesting lore, and just by simply calling it just complicated is the understatement of the fucking year. And sure, part of the success of this franchise story has always been the underlying mystery, with each game containing more answers while also adding even more questions, to the point where it basically became addicting to trying to figure out the pieces of this puzzle. Like, why do you think Game Theory has over 70 plus videos on this indie franchise, all constituting like millions and millions of views? A lot of the greatness of FNAF is how, given the wonderful setting and scary themes, this game's story is told through cryptic clues and hints with the hopeless, foreboding atmosphere regarding missing dead children, the possible supernatural. So you're probably wondering, for a simple series as it is, what's the problem? Oh boy, let me tell you. For starters, FNAF 1, the first release game, is not the start of everything chronologically. Shocker, I know. But to give details, being the first game to release did set a precedent for everything, with how subtle the overall mystery of the game has to this day. It continues to be praised. From the setting of the supernatural animatronics and other theories surrounding shit like Golden Freddy, there was so much to unpack. But the main mystery that got people rattling was
The Bite of 87?
Yes, thank you, Mark. The Bite of 87. Which in turn came Five Nights at Freddy's 2, a prequel sequel. God damn it. Tale as old as time, right? But besides the general idea of being new in line in the timeline, the more people dug around this game, besides finding out it was a prequel, obviously, it's how much it added more details that got people thinking, especially surrounding the infamous Bite of 87. But the biggest mystery at the time was something about yellow suits and this purple guy. But don't think for too long, because the third game came out with the only mystery surrounding this animatronic here. This game right here was already treated as a final game, but a lot of the mystery around this game was a lot more subtle. Since FNAF 2, it started the theme around adding hints, clues, and backstory info behind these badly Atari-esque 8-bit minigames. FNAF 3 also had them too, but they're more so hidden, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't know how people managed to find all of them. Like, how is anyone supposed to know that this part of the wall was supposed to symbolize a fucking number pad? But FNAF 3 also gave small cutscenes in this format as well, which clearly paints a narrative of what happened to this guy and 2 separate endings. I mean, sure. Then the fourth game came out, which most of what it did was try and fill in the blanks, but still added more fucking questions than answers, because scenes like this happened, which, sure, being material, and then this fucking box, which I'm sure to this day no one knows anything about. Just the location ended up amplifying these issues, where people to this day still are confused about the stories within Sister Location and FNAF 4 and how they fit, creating even more confusions and answers, also trying to figure out which came before and blah 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 blah. And sure, Pizzeria Simulator did serve as a true, final, satisfying, and conclusive end. Right before everything afterwards shut on that conclusive narrative, and then all of a sudden just started talking about fucking AI and robotic consciousness, and now apparently the video games that came before it are now apparently also canon within its own story, going full meta. Jesus fucking Christ. This pretty much brings me into the main complete issue when it comes to this franchise's story, and what is canon. This basically is the peak when it comes to confusing game story, because like I said, you wish it was just complicated, but you can tell this story wasn't exactly planned out, so to speak. And don't even get me started on the rest of the game that came after, but until Pizzeria Simulator came out, all of these games at least at the time gave a nice conclusive story at the end of it. I mean, sure, by the time FNAF 3 came out, shit could have ended right there. But since the first 3 games, it was already nice and tidy, and the way how it goes about the entire mystery within this trilogy was already phenomenal. FNAF created like this whole new path for many other games to conquer people, if you want to delve deep into that notion. From simple minigames, a story is told, and the many hidden elements lying there. As far as I can tell, these minigame cutscenes are supposed to be secret storytelling, with this sort of low quality theme to distinguish them from the main gameplay, and also to be as mysterious and less understandable as possible. So the moment you get it, you feel like you're accomplished in figuring out something that you weren't supposed to know about, and it seems simply mind-blowing for some. But since FNAF 4 and eventually Sister Location, people still can't come up with a solid interpretation of what it's trying to tell. Like the trilogy, where logic came up with universally accepted answers, FNAF 4 was just so vague that it had to be personally interpreted. At the same, any actual answers ended up deconfirmed or just more confusing than so. And I haven't even touched upon other media sources from this franchise because those certainly made it even worse. Shit like the books and even spin-offs like FNAF World are also apparently are considered canon-ish. Like, even if the books, for example, aren't technically canon, apparently they also still contain hints and notions on figuring out the actual main canon. Like, why? Hell, this fucking FNAF book for kids also apparently has hints and answers to certain questions and theories about the overall story of this franchise. A fucking kids book. So you mean to tell me that a 100-page 7th grade reading level children's book is necessary to understand a fictional story about haunted animatronics? I do not need to listen and understand a kid's coloring and puzzle book to understand a story. Like, fucking hell, is this what it's like to be a Fates fan?
It's cool just seeing the variation of different machines that they have. There's one that was like a balance board.
I don't even know if there was like a hidden message or something to take away from this, but one of the things that is well known when it comes to video game stories with shit like FNAF, Mario, Kingdom Hearts, or any other games mentioned with confusing or complicated stories is that we all can't seem to stop liking them. I don't know, despite how convoluted they can be, they're entertaining as shit. It's true. Face it, even some of the games that I mentioned, despite some of them being complete messes, are still very much popular and well beloved. Even a series like FNAF, and everyone can agree how flawed that shit is, but to this day, there are so many dedicated fans, and other games are completely no different. Metal Gear, Bioshock, Fallout, Assassin's Creed, a lot of these games, even with hard to understand narratives, are also one of the most beloved and most popular series of games regardless. Like, sure, we can meme a lot of these game stories, and some can pretty much ignore a lot of the hidden details, but personally, I feel as if that does a very disservice to a lot of the creativity a lot of games have, that in some cases I feel like we are slowly losing in this day and age. The lore is what gives meaning to what we're playing, and dismissing it is like dismissing the soul of the game. Even though the very complexity of a lot of these series narratives just has this weird hold on all of us that I feel that there's just no way to explain it. And sure, not everyone will feel the same way, and it's completely subjective. But the more the complicated, the more interesting it seems, and even if the story ain't so clear cut. And you know, the more the complication, the more you get deeply involved and invested in games. And you know what? It's honestly perfectly fine with me. Because at least that means New Super Luigi U is considered canon now. Fuck you.